Please welcome the first ever elected official from the United Kingdom to keynote at South by Southwest, London Mayor Sadiq Khan.
Thank you, Hugh, for that kind introduction, and thank you for that very warm reception just now. Can I thank everyone I've met for the warm welcome I've received in Austin, or as an Austinite said to me last night, the People's Republic of Austin. You hear good things about Texas back home, and indeed Austin has been full of good things. There's the famous expression, everything's bigger in Texas. And from what I've seen over the last couple of days, this turns out to be true, apart from me, obviously. But to be honest, the thing that surprised me the most is the number of hipsters I've encountered. Wow! I'm starting to feel a bit left out without a beard. But seriously, it's a real honor to be back in the US and a real privilege to be following in the footsteps of some truly inspirational people at this prestigious conference. Unfortunately, due to the time difference, the sun has already set back home in London. But one upshot of giving this speech now is the sun hasn't set in Washington, D.C. yet. This hopefully means no late night tweets attacking me during the course of this speech. Let's see. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'd like to talk today about one of our biggest shared challenges, a challenge facing Britain, America, and countries and cities across Europe in equal measure. And that's ensuring that the advancement of technology is for the benefit of everyone in society. In the US, the UK, and other countries around the world, we're experiencing a period of historic change and uncertainty. This is affecting our politics, our economies, and our societies. I make this speech today at a time when back home in Britain, we're still reeling from the outcome of the referendum to leave the European Union. Sadly, we're only preparing for the economic storm Brexit could bring, but dealing with something far deeper, something that has been bubbling under the surface for many years, but has only been truly exposed more recently. And that's the increasing disconnect and disillusionment of many communities across Britain, from our politics, from our economy, and our shared way of life. The truth is that many of those who voted to leave the EU did so because of a deep sense of unease about globalization, about the modern world and pace of change, and about the inequality they experience. London is one of the most diverse cities in the world, with more than 300 languages spoken and with young and old living cheek by jowl. This is one of our greatest strengths. But as a nation, we're becoming increasingly polarized, with the politics of blame and hatred seeping deeper into our national debates. Here in the US, and in countries across Europe, there have been similar expressions of unease, fear, and anger. And this is evident in the rise in nativism and populism, and in a divisive form of political discourse becoming the norm. Just look at the latest elections in Italy last week. Of course, there are multiple reasons for this trend, and the honest truth is we don't yet have all the answers. But there are some undeniable common threads. Growing groups of people who feel increasingly left behind by deindustrialization and globalization. And the way technology has, and still is, profoundly changing our economies and our way of life. The dominant characteristic is the unprecedented scale and speed of change, especially change driven by technology. We see it all around us. Technology is disrupting and shifting the way we do everything. The nature of our economies and the types of jobs available, where we live and how we travel, the way we consume news and process information, and vitally, the way we communicate and interact with one another. How we deal with this transformation will be a defining challenge of the 21st century, because it cuts across so many layers of our society, politics, economics, and the general well-being of modern citizens. The question now is not only how we utilize this new technology for the benefit of everyone in our society, how we use it to reduce inequality and to maintain decent employment rights. Just as significant is how we prevent harm to the social cohesion of our communities and how we interact with one another. With these types of profound questions, we rely on the principled judgments made by the innovators themselves. But the public also has a right to be heard and a right to expect democratic leaders to guide them along this delicate path. And this is something I believe has been absent in recent years. We've been through major technology revolutions before. Overall, we've come out stronger and more prosperous. These advances have brought us some of humanity's greatest accomplishments. The first industrial revolution, born in Britain, not only changed my country, but the rest of the world. We had the rise of the middle class for the first time, and the innovations that were developed, such as the steam train and new machinery, contributed to the advancement of agriculture, industry, and trade. But it also led to unrest and protests from the Luddites who feared for their textile jobs, and to an era of greater pollution, child labour, and unsafe working conditions before the advent of trade unions and proper employment laws. All revolutions are by their very nature disruptive, but this fourth industrial revolution that we're going through now is different. It's different to those that came before, with far greater risks. We're now in a new era where exponential change can happen and spread across the world faster than ever before. And just as many have felt marginalized by shifts away from manufacturing and blue-collar industries, for today's workers, there's a fear that new technology is bypassing the skills they've spent their lifetime developing, and the social contract struck by the post-war generation on employment rights, rights that were hard-won and decades in the making. If managed poorly, and if tech sectors are tempted to reap the rewards of their innovations without a care for their wider impact, I fear all this change risks an age of unprecedented inequality and division that could undermine the pillars and key institutions of our society. Take social media. A handful of the largest global tech companies have managed to amass an enormous amount of power over how information is consumed. Platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube have brought huge benefits to society. They've made it easier for us to stay in touch with those we love, meet like-minded people, and have easier access to information we want. And they've enabled talented people to share their creativity directly with the world. But understandably, there are growing concerns about the way some of the biggest companies on the planet are impacting our lives and the overall well-being of our societies. In some cases, these new platforms have been used to exacerbate, fuel, and deepen the divisions within our communities. The impact is and continues to be profound and should worry democracies around the world. We've already seen evidence of elections and referendums being influenced, a rise in online abuse, misogyny, and religious hatred, fake news spreading misinformation, algorithms blinkering us from different points of view and pushing people to extremes, and terrorists and far-right groups using social media to not only conspire, but to radicalize and brainwash others. All of this is dividing and polarizing us rather than uniting us. I know all this too well from personal experience. I receive loads of stuff on Twitter and Facebook on a daily basis. I want to share with you today just half a dozen of the types of tweets that I receive. @Mem Usay tweeted, "Deport all Muslims and make London white again. All problems will be gone." @Warprever tweeted, "Sadiq Khan is just a gay Muzzy terrorist." @Emmanuel_Maris tweeted, "Muslims have no dignity. I wish Sadiq Khan would blow himself up like they all do. He might get his 12 virgins." @BillWall69 tweeted, "I say, kill the Mayor of London and you will be rid of one Muslim terrorist." @Latino_Amante tweeted, "Treason is still a crime punishable by death in this country. Your name will be at the top of that list." @Speedwagon PRST tweeted, "I'd pay for someone to execute Sadiq Khan." Now, I could go on, but I won't. I don't read this out to be portrayed as a victim or to ask for sympathy. But ask yourself this: what happens when young boys and girls from minority backgrounds see this kind of thing on their timelines, or experience it themselves, or someone thinking about becoming a politician? And what about girls and women who are being driven from these platforms, reversing our long fight for gender equality? We simply must do more to protect people online. Social media platforms already have a legal obligation to remove content that breaks local laws. But this isn't always happening or happening quickly enough. Facebook Twitter, and other platforms are finally starting to react to the criticisms and are developing technology to make sure the reporting process becomes quicker and more effective. And I welcome this. But with the skills and resources these companies have at their disposal, I believe it's possible to go further and faster. What we need to see is a stronger duty of care so that social media platforms can live up to their promises to be places that connect, unify, and democratize the sharing of information, and be places where everyone feels welcome and valued. If this doesn't happen, then more countries will start to follow or go further than what Germany has done. The German government have changed the law so that social media companies face hefty fines if they fail to quickly remove hate speech, fake news, and illegal material. Another example of the opportunities and risks ahead is the growing gig economy. While the social media revolution has changed the way we create, share, and consume creative content, peer-to-peer platforms are changing the way people monetize their skills and time. This has the potential to fundamentally impact the way we view employment. At its best, the sharing economy can make it easier for people to sell their skills, their time, and even their home in a way that suits them at a fair price. But at its worst, it can drive down pay, workers' rights, and safety standards. If the sharing economy is real, it should be as liberating for the worker or supplier as it is for the consumer. Yes, innovative new companies are providing fantastic services to people around the world and have created tens of thousands of new jobs in the process. But without prudent regulation and oversight, this new way of doing business risks being used as cover to break up decades of established and hard-fought rights. We must now ask whether it's acceptable for platforms in the quick pursuit for market share to be allowed to set a price which is too low to adequately reward workers, while at the same time incentivizing people to work just like full-time employees. Companies that behave in this way are not genuine peer-to-peer platforms, they're simply companies, service providers, or retailers with an app. There's nothing wrong with this, but we can't confuse matters by thinking that because a business is smart, disruptive, popular even, and has a really neat app, it somehow has a right to behave in a different regulatory status to its competitors. Ultimately, there must be greater responsibility taken by some tech companies for the impact they're having on the world. And crucially, no business or industry should ever consider itself above the local rules or laws set by democratic processes. In London, we've been clear with Uber and other companies that everyone, no matter how big, must play by the rules, no exceptions. Now, I appreciate that some of these companies can afford to spend a fortune on an array of lawyers and PR experts, and they do. However, in the long run, attempts to subvert, bypass, or turn the public against proper regulation doesn't do anyone any favours. But I want to be clear, the onus for change should not just be on tech companies and innovators. One of the biggest problems over the last few years is that politicians and governments have just been passive, sitting on their hands, while the tech revolution has happened around them. There's been a failure to ensure that our economies and our regulatory structures are prepared and relevant. It must ultimately fall to government, working with tech businesses and leaders to ensure that this revolution is not detrimental to our long-term process and progress. Put simply, there's been a dereliction of duty on the part of politicians and policymakers to ensure that the rapid growth in technology is utilised and steered in a direction that benefits us all. Perhaps we all place too much faith in the stated intentions and vision of the tech pioneers, the vision of great openness, inclusivity and morality to create something that benefits everyone. But as things have progressed, we must now ask ourselves, how can we ensure that technology always helps and never hinders our aim to create more open, connected, socially integrated societies? You know, our economies have always needed new regulations in place to meet the needs of workers and consumers when the environment changes. Evolving economies must mean evolving regulation, and today is no different. Rather than blaming companies for innovating ahead of regulation, politicians must fix things when the regulation is out of date. The question now for governments or traditional sectors should not be how to slow down innovation in its tracks, because we can't and we shouldn't. It should be how we mitigate against the potentially negative impacts of disruption. And more than that, how can we harness the very same technologies to drive up standards and to create more just and equal societies? You know, it was the great US President, JFK, who said in 1960, "The new frontiers will present us with both dangers and opportunities. Our task is to overcome those dangers and seize those opportunities." In my view, it's now our generation's turn to step up with solutions that match the scale of the challenge today. One of the key differences with this tech revolution is the role cities can and should play. The world's growing population is increasingly concentrated in our cities, a trend that is only accelerating. And cities are linking together to form the nervous system of our global economy. In this fast-paced change, city government can cope better with digital disruption, turning technological upheavals to our advantage. This is my ambition as the Mayor of London, and I encourage other mayors and great cities to join me in this mission. In London, we're harnessing the power of new technology to transform lives. We're aiming to make London a global byword for smart cities with data, connectivity and innovation supporting our infrastructure and services. We're getting much more involved in using tech to provide public services to the citizens we represent. We're exploring what responsible technology means, what we can do from City Hall, and how we can encourage people and companies based in our city to behave in positive ways. We're utilising data to transform the way public services are delivered, making them more accessible, efficient and responsive. We're looking at London's strengths in AI and automation, finding the best ways to take advantage of the opportunities it could bring, whilst also investing in education to ensure Londoners have the digital skills they need for the jobs of tomorrow. We've set up an online hate crime hub, the first of its kind in Europe, to work with social media companies. We're setting up public competition to fund London innovation towards solving some of the big social challenges that we face. And crucially, we're breaking down the barriers that still exist for girls and women to reach their potential, not only in the tech sector, but in every part of our society. You know, 2018 is a pivotal year for London as we mark the centenary of women winning the right to vote in the UK. And as a proud feminist, I've launched a campaign, Behind Every Great City. This campaign is about celebrating how far we've come, celebrating how it's the achievements and contributions of women from all walks of life that make cities like London so great, and understanding and championing the fact that behind every great city is equality, opportunity, and progress. But we're also using this moment to acknowledge how far we still have to go for full gender equality. My ambition is to make London the most inclusive city in the world, a place where everyone, no matter their gender, background, race, or religion, has the opportunities to get on in life. An example is the work we're doing with my new digital skills programme. This new initiative aims to arm young Londoners, particularly women and those from minority communities, with the skills they need to access the jobs of the future. And my message today to other cities and to global tech leaders is that collectively we must do more to champion greater inclusivity within the tech community. It's not only the right thing to do, evidence shows it's good for our economies too. Everyone should be able to benefit from the fruits of this tech revolution. So our job is not just to ensure the next generation has the skills and infrastructure needed to succeed, but also to reskill and support those who will inevitably lose out as part of this digital revolution. It may not be as exciting, but we have a duty of care to care about the impact of the transition as well as the end goal. You know, we've seen in both our countries' histories the pain and devastation that can come when there is a failure to intervene in order to prevent economic dislocation, leaving whole communities suffering for decades. Margaret Thatcher is one of a handful of British prime ministers who became well known and respected in the US. But back in the UK, she remains a controversial, divisive figure in some parts of the country to this day. And let me tell you why. Her government is blamed by millions of people in swathes of my country for ruining their communities. Whether it was coal or steel, she oversaw the closure of once thriving industries that predominantly working class communities not only relied upon for their living, but for their way of life. Clearly, the viability of these industries was changing. But what was wrong was how these communities were just left high and dry when their jobs and the jobs for their children and grandchildren were just taken away. And no new training provided. No action from the government to replace old industries with a new source of jobs and growth. And no support or a helping hand to find new work. And the impact is still being felt today. Generational unemployment, urban decay, a rise in mental health issues, a loss of hope, and too many people now searching to find someone other to blame for their own frustrations and unhappiness. I understand it's a similar story in the industrial towns across America's so-called Rust Belt. We must ensure this kind of transition through an industrial revolution never happens again, because it not only hurts our economy as a whole, but leaves an enduring scar on our society, more bitterness, hatred, and division. So let me finish with this. We've seen in both our countries that when people feel left behind, the door is left open for some individuals to take advantage, to play on people's fears by blaming others, to sow the seeds of division, to overpromise a return to jobs and industry of the past. But this road only leads to more bitterness, hatred, and suffering of the most disadvantaged. The only way we can counteract the rise in negative populism is to counteract the drivers making people feel left behind in the first place. This is about ensuring that everyone can benefit from the fruits of globalization and that we have fair, inclusive economies. The route to achieving this goal is to embrace the advancement of tech and proactively shape the future relationship between technology and society for the benefit of everyone, from social media and the gig economy to automation and AI. The technology we have can't be uninvented. We must move forward and make the most of our times, and we must strive to take advantage of our growing ability to mould the future at a local, city level. Our societies and global communities, which are becoming even more connected and interdependent, will be moulded in the crucible of this fourth industrial revolution. We shouldn't see this through the prism of a threat to jobs and our social fabric. We should see the true threat as the failure of tech companies to appreciate the responsibility they have to wider society and the failure of policymakers to adapt. Ladies and gentlemen, the good news is that we're only just at the beginning of this journey. And if the companies and politicians at all levels of government can work together to shape the future of tech, then I remain optimistic that we can utilize technology to create fairer, more united cities and countries, and optimistic that we can work together to instill hope for a better, more inclusive future for us all. Thank you very much.
Wow. I'm Lydia Polgreen, Editor-in-Chief of HuffPost. You know, listening to you reading those tweets was pretty jarring. You probably, through your career as a lawyer and as a politician, received messages like that, perhaps through the mail, perhaps phone calls. What's the impact of just this flood coming? What's the impact on you personally, on your family, on your daughters?
Look, I mean, the purpose for me reading those tweets out, and it's the first time I've ever done that, I've never shared some of the stuff that I receive, was it's not about me. And of course it's distressing. You know, I rang my wife this morning to let her know and to ask her to let the children know that I'll be reading those tweets out. But these are tweets in the public domain. And Lydia, what we've got to realize is that there are young people who aspire to be politicians or to be in the public eye, and that sort of stuff makes them think twice. If you've got a nephew or niece, or a brother or sister thinking about a career in politics or, you know, in the public eye, would you genuinely advise them to do that, bearing in mind some of the stuff that people like me receive? And I think, you know, it shouldn't be a question of how strong I am or whether I can withstand that. I think there's a responsibility on all of us to not just show solidarity, but to take action. Because I worry about the great female Prime Minister or great, dare I say, female President choosing not to do so because she's thinking, you know what, I can't be bothered, it's not fair on my family.
Well, you've talked about the need for regulation of the tech platforms and how we've kind of allowed innovation to happen and not had regulation keep up. What do you think are some steps that these big platforms could take to make them better citizens in our global democracy?
Firstly, look, this tech revolution is fantastic. And it really is. I mean, if you just think about the progress we've made, the things we can do, you can go on a date, you can fall in love, you can do all sorts of other things. But actually, we've seen in the recent past allegations of interference in elections and fake news and inciting hatred. And I think there are very easy things that can be done. We know there is technology that exists, algorithms that can be designed to spot this stuff. And by the way, as a former human rights lawyer, I'm a big advocate of free speech. This isn't about depriving people of free speech. This is about inciting hatred. Mm-hmm. This is about things that divide our communities. Social media companies can employ staff to proactively take these things down or to respond to complaints made. Because my worry is this: if they don't act responsibly, then we'll go down the road of Germany and even further, and you'll have people like me being pressurized by the electorate to bring in legislation, and some of this legislation may be draconian, and it may inhibit the advancements made by technology, and I think that would be a bad thing.
So all of this conversation about the rise of nationalism and hate speech on digital platforms is coming in the context of a real crisis about globalization. And you've spoken eloquently about the importance of London as a symbol of free and open cities in an environment where nationalism is taking over. At the same time, though, globalization has been great for global cities, but they've also, I think, come to be seen, quite rightly, as one of the most effective engines of creating inequality. You have so much wealth being sucked into great cities like mine, New York, and yours, London. And how can we look at a future in which the benefits of economic growth are just spread more widely?
Well, I mean, coming from New York, the second greatest city in the world.
Hang on now.
I mean, you're right, and this is a serious issue in relation to those who aren't benefiting from the fruits of this tech revolution. Mm-hmm. And this is the point that I was trying to make in my speech, which is actually we've got to make sure those who are currently excluded are included. How? We've got to train them up to have the skills for the jobs of tomorrow. How? We've got to make sure we embrace this tech revolution. So I'm not scared of artificial intelligence or automation or autonomous vehicles. By the way, autonomous vehicles, yes. Autonomous mayors, no. We want human beings being mayors. But we've got to embrace that, because that's the future. I mean, and I deliberately gave the example of the Luddites who, went into factories and smashed the machinery in the factories because it was affecting their ability to earn a living by doing stuff in home. And also we saw the impact on the agrarian community. And what I'm saying in 2018 is we've got to make sure that the traditional sectors understand they've got to innovate and they've got to surf the wave. And we've got to train up people. That's a combination of training up youngsters to have the skills for the jobs of tomorrow, retraining those who are currently working in traditional sectors, but actually also love the tech sector as we do. There are too few women in the tech sector, too few women in positions of power and influence, and too few from deprived minority communities. And I think that's a wasted potential, and that's an asset we should be tapping into.
So, I agree, absolutely. At the same time, I mean, over the course of your political career, you were part of the New Labour movement, and that movement, much like Bill Clinton's presidency, was really about embracing globalization, embracing kind of big capitalism as an engine of growth. And now that we've seen this convergence of these two massive waves of globalization and technological change washing over people's lives with such violence. Progress, yes, but also tremendous disruption. Do you have any regrets? Are there things you wish that you or we as societies had done differently as we were celebrating the good things that globalization brought?
Absolutely. Look, there are too many people in our respective countries who haven't enjoyed the fruits of globalization. They weren't skilled up. Their industries weren't supported. It was too city-centric. Mm-hmm. And it's really important we learn those lessons. This trickle-down stuff doesn't work. And that's why you've seen these organic movements all around the world. And And we've also, those of us who are progressives, this idea of triangulation, I think that was a mistake. I think we've got to realise that actually one of the reasons why individuals, we can think who they are, I'll try not to name them to get into trouble, individuals, rather than addressing people's fears, are playing in them. Mm-hmm. These are short-term gimmicks to win elections or win referendums. They aren't medium to long-term solutions to the challenges we face. So, for example, if you're somebody who is unhappy about lack of healthcare, somebody unhappy because you can't afford to buy a home of your own, your children can't go to a decent school, it ain't the fault of the other, or the immigrant, or the Mexicans. It's because we've not invested in healthcare. We've not invested in enough homes that people can afford to live in. We're not invested in schools. We've got to explain that in a proper way. And I think what we did, in the last 10, 20, 30 years is assume that everyone will enjoy the fruits of globalization. And they clearly haven't, which is why you're seeing this rebellion in relation to populist, nativist movements around the world.
So I think that, I've watched this wave of elections. Obviously, Brexit was a canary in the coal mine. Since then, you had the French election, which was very interesting because neither the traditional left nor the traditional right made it to the last round. Of course, the election of Donald Trump, and then I think perhaps most frighteningly, what's happened in Italy. How can we get back to or how can we escape this nationalist wave? I felt after the French election that there was a pullback and that we weren't going to see a continuation of that wave, and yet Italy happened. So what do you think we can do, and what do you think cities in particular can do to stop this?
Well, one of the things that worries me is I believe in the politics of hope. And my own election was one where we campaigned positive, optimistic, hopeful. But we've seen in the recent past elections being won using the politics of fear. Italy most recently, and we've seen other elections around the world where that's been a device that's been successful. But there are examples we can point to, whether it's New Zealand, whether it's Canada, whether it's France, whether it's London, where
or some of the elections that have happened since 2016 here in the United States.
I think the key thing is to treat the electorate as adults. One of the things we've got to do as politicians is to realise that one of our responsibilities is to be teachers and in a non-patronising way explain to the electorate some of the challenges we face. Some of the solutions we have aren't going to be overnight successes. It's a marathon, not a sprint, in many of these policies. And the thing that really worries me, Lydia, is some of the people who voted for the candidates who played on the fears they have, using the politics of fear, they've not got the solutions. So when, in a few weeks, in a few months, as was promised, you aren't seeing the steel factories reopening in your country, or those who manufacture cars suddenly booming, those people who voted for people offering this are going to ask questions, and that will turn to cynicism and anger. And the same goes in my country. People voted to leave the EU, expecting the land of milk and honey. And when the land of milk and honey doesn't come, they'll be angry and they'll be cynical. And my criticism is also, it's a plague in all our houses, because they'll assume we're all the same. And that's why I'm a keen believer in under-promising and over-delivering. It's really important we don't take the electorate for a ride.
Well, so talk to us about Brexit. I mean, obviously, London plays a huge role in the global economy, and significant parts of that could be under threat. What steps are you taking, and how are you trying to position London in a post-Brexit world?
So one of the things I'm doing is trying to persuade my government to negotiate sensibly with the European Union. I'm not doing very well in that regard. Let's see if I'm better in the future than I've been in the past. But look, London is a global city. The underlying strengths that make London a great city are still there. The amazing Londoners, the talent we have, the access to capital, our unique ecosystem, is still there, and that will stay there. The three most important words that represents our USP is London is open. London is open to talent, to creativity, to innovation, to tech, and that will always be the case. And it's really important that we don't lose any of that when it comes to the negotiations with the European Union, because actually It's a real driver for wealth and prosperity in my country. And that's why if the government, if the Brexiteers want Brexit to be a success, it's in their interests to make sure they do a good deal with the EU, because if it's not a good deal and Brexit isn't a success, they'll have shown to have been on the wrong side of history.
So I think there's been a tremendous amount of interest in your stance on Uber, and it's really a double-edged sword, or the comments that you've made in the past about Uber and some of the decisions there. It's really a double-edged sword, because when you talk to these technology platform companies, they see themselves as opening up opportunities for people who've previously been excluded. And I remember reading quite a moving story in the New York Times about your typical black cab driver versus your typical Uber driver. The black cab driver tends to be a white person, comes from a greater social wealth standing, and Uber drivers tend to be immigrants. They tend to be people who would have a very hard time raising the capital to become a black cab driver, which is not an easy job to get. So how do you balance those things when you think about these big technology platforms?
I mean, it's actually more simple than people think, which is there are rules, and those rules should be obeyed by everyone, and that's it. And so whether you're Uber or whether you're anybody else, you should play by the rules. And also a lot of the shared economy, the peer-to-peer stuff is amazing. It's amazing. But basically when something's a minicab and an app, the rules that apply to the minicabs still apply to you. And that's what Uber needs to understand. And to give the new global chief executive credit, and I do, I think he gets it, whereas the previous guy didn't. And what we're seeing, in a number of ways, what we're seeing is two things. One is, and I understand this, Uber are challenging the decision made by Transport for London through the courts, and of course they've every right to do so. But separately, what the global CEO is doing is meeting with my commissioner and recognising with humility some of the practices done by Uber in the past that were wrong. And I welcome that. And look, this has not been anti-Uber or banning Uber. This is about having rules that should be obeyed and respected by everyone. And let's wait and see what happens. And this is my point about, as economies evolve, regulations should evolve, clearly when it comes to disruptive technology. But when it comes to rules that are there and that people should obey, it doesn't matter how big you are, you should play by the rules.
So do you hope to have similar conversations, perhaps not with you, but we haven't seen that same kind of outreach from Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey, the leaders of Google. Do you think that these leaders are doing enough to show some humility about the damage that their platforms can do?
What we're hearing is it seems they're starting to get it. And they're starting to wake up to some of the challenges there are. And by the way, I don't want to detract from the massive opportunities. It goes without saying they are amazing technologies. They really are amazing. But I think they've got to recognise that they've got to address some of the concerns that we all have. They can't feel good about some of the adverse consequences of their technology. And my point is this, I'm not threatening anybody, but unless they evolve and adapt and take steps themselves, then don't be surprised if governments go down the Germany route or even further.
Yeah. I want to take a couple questions from the Slido, from the audience. This is a great one because I think it really goes to a question about gentrification, which is something that London is struggling with, affordability. In the 1980s, I felt like London was more diverse. How can tech help the lack of social housing against the influx of foreign money? Now, this is something that's happening in San Francisco, it's happening in New York City. Wealthy global cities everywhere are really struggling with maintaining that diversity and the opportunity for newcomers who maybe don't have the wealth. So what should we be doing?
This is the biggest issue facing all successful cities, which is that we're growing, and we've got a plan for the growth. And one of the issues you've got to plan for is affordable housing, because housing is not affordable currently in London. And so we're doing a variety of things. We've got to build more genuinely affordable homes, but tech can really help in a number of ways. Firstly, people's working lifestyles is changing now. You can work from home. You don't need to travel into work. That brings a responsibility on those of us that plan developments. So I think, just like an essential public utility is water, gas, electric, I think an essential public utility is ultra-fast broadband. And we've got to make sure we say to developers, you've got to be designing that into new homes you're building. We're also in London, we've got a generation of new work-live spaces. People now work from home, but also want to live in communities that are diverse and are nice places to live. And so we're working on this agenda to make sure we've got affordable housing in London. But you're right, compared to the 80s, it's less affordable to live in London. And we're trying to address this. And the phrase I'd use is it's a marathon, not a sprint, when it comes to making up the failures of successive governments over successive decades not to build genuinely affordable homes in London, and we're rectifying that.
Yeah. This is a passionate issue here in Austin, I know, so I definitely want to get to this question. So Uber and Lyft left Austin after they lost a local city vote, and then the state government quickly overruled it. I think that there are folks in the audience who would love to hear advice from you on what local government can do to set the terms of its own conditions. How do you go toe-to-toe with these big, deep-pocketed tech companies?
Well, firstly, I mean, look, I don't start from the premise of being adversarial.
No, sure.
And so that's where, when I became mayor, it was quite clear that the experience we had, the Transport for London, with Uber in the past was they're very adversarial. And as I said during my speech, hire an army of lawyers, an array of PR experts, and try and undermine the legislation, the regulation that exists, and turn the public against the regulation, and so which is a challenge. And I think the key thing that I've learned over the last 2 years is if you think you've got right on your side, stand up for yourself, stand up for the regulation, and support the regulators. And what we've seen though is the day after the decision was taken by TfL not to renew the license, certain commentators, certain politicians from different political parties were very critical for us having the audacity to stand up to this company. But over a period of time, and again I give credit to the more sensible approach of the new global CEO, that people have realised that actually we were right to say to this company, the rules are there, play by the rules. And the same should apply to every company, no matter how big or small. Another example is in relation to tax. Look, a small business pays taxes on time when they're supposed to. Big companies hire an army of accountants to avoid paying tax, and small businesses not unreasonably complain. How is it the rules are applied differently to the big guys to the little guys? That's why those of us in positions of power and influence have got to make sure this perception people have of unfairness is addressed. And one of the ways you address unfairness is making sure you treat everyone equally, no matter how big or small.
So speaking of cities, I mean, while you're here in Austin, you've also spent some time with other mayors. This is, this is a city that loves cities. So,
by the way, when I was with the other mayors, all 40, I didn't say London was the greatest city in the world. But if
good call. I'm curious about the U.S.-Britain relationship. I mean, obviously, it's always described as this very special relationship. You've had some tangles with our president. How would you diagnose the state of our relationship?
Look, I don't think you Americans realise how much there is a close affinity from Brits and Londoners in particular with your country. I mean, we genuinely love America, we love Americans. If you just think about the music we listen to, the films we watch, the clothes we wear, we're hooked on Kardashians, really, we really are.
Real Housewives.
Yeah, all that stuff. But the point I make is this: look, our relationship with the US is unique. Put aside special relationship, I describe it more as best mates. We are best mates, we're best friends. Now the way you treat your best friend is different to the way you treat an acquaintance or somebody you see once every 6 months. When you have a best friend, you stand shoulder to shoulder with them in times of adversity. They're your closest ally. If they're in bother, you're by their side and you help them out. But if you can't call out your best friend, if you can't say to your best friend, listen man, you're bang out of order, then they're not really a best friend, are they? And I just think, Lydia, you're my best friend. I just think if you're the president of the USA, you have a huge burden because you are leader of the free world in many people's eyes. When it comes to concerns around security in North Korea, you've got a really important role to play. But you're also a beacon of pluralism, liberalism, really good values. And I just think it means you're a great country when your president tweets the stuff he does.
I think you'll find that there's violent agreement with that sentiment in this room. You know, we're almost out of time, but it would be great to just get one last question in from the audience. So let's just talk quickly about this question of education. I mean, London is a center of global excellence when it comes to education, and yet we're seeing that there's kind of unfair benefits that come from concentrating so much educational excellence. How does that help other parts outside of London reskill and get more?
This is really important. And one of the things that New York and London share is in our respective countries, so in London, but outside London, there is an anti-London feeling because they think we get it all. And the same applies with the US and New York as well. And we have a responsibility, I think, as global cities to make sure other parts of our country enjoy the benefits that London offers. And so we're doing work, London is, with other cities around the UK. We've got the best universities in the world in London, but we've got to make sure that students don't just come to London. We're speaking with other cities across the UK to make sure they benefit from the success of London. One of the things we've got to do, though, Lydia, is with this tech revolution, it is so important we skill up not just young people, but we retrain those around the country to make sure they can take advantage of the opportunities technology brings. Because if they don't, they will go the way of previous generations who've not enjoyed the fruits of the Industrial Revolution. We're in a digital age. We can't have analog skills. It's really important we skill up people all across our respective countries so they don't, walk or, dare I say, run into the arms of people who play to the politics of fear.
Yeah. One last question. Donald Trump comes to the UK. How will you... What's going to happen?
Let's wait and see if and when he does come.
Okay. All right. Mayor Khan, thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you.